coming back around to the topic that we got started on last month, which was the two truths. And because this is a topic concerning the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism, I would encourage everyone to start this session generating the attitude of bodhicitta, which is that may I, by listening to this teaching, be able to free all beings from suffering and bring them to the state of enlightenment. So that's my motivation for sharing these teachings with you, and I invite you to share that motivation as well for listening to and hopefully eventually putting these teachings into practice. So let's do a little recap about what we talked about last month, I guess it was. We were talking about the two truths, and those two truths being the relative, or as I was discussing before, that term has some more layers of meaning, like fictitious truth or obscured truth, something like that. And we'll get do a little more recap on that. And then the ultimate truth. So in brief, what those are is the kind of ordinary way that we experience things in our unenlightened state versus the actual nature of those things that would be seen in the experience of an enlightened being. So we often talk about that our ordinary perception is one of seeing things, but we don't see that those things don't actually exist as they appear to us, and that ultimate reality is something that to someone who is experiencing it, it actually exists as it appears. So let me give you an example for what that might mean. So for us, this is going to be a little bit far out, and I'm going to be expanding on this topic, but when we see things, we see everything as if it was permanent, singular, and independently existing. So, for example, we talked about this last month, so hopefully this isn't entirely foreign, and for some of you who weren't here last month, I'll try and catch you up. But we can talk about the conventional kind of existence of something as simple as this table. So conventionally speaking, it appears to our mind as something singular. A table is a table. It's not a bunch of things. It is one thing. And we think ordinarily that we see a table. When I see this with my eyes, I think I see a table. But in terms of ultimate level of truth, what I'm actually seeing, even conventionally, isn't a table. I see the shape and color of some wood. So a table is just an idea that I have about some visual things that I see. That's even just a surface level. That's not even getting to emptiness or ultimate truth. But ultimately speaking, we do some kind of analytic process to find out what this ultimate truth is. It doesn't always have to be through an analytic process, but generally when you're explaining the two truths through an analytic way, we have to talk about there being a general way things appear to us, and then some kind of investigative method to find out what they are in reality. So we would often talk about breaking things down, analyzing what's actually there. So when we see a table, we have the top of a table. With this table in particular, there's a drawer on this table. There are legs on this table, sides of the table, a front and a back, a top. So I might ask you, where's the table? And you might say, well, it's all of that. I'll say, then, is the table a multiplicity? Or is it a singular thing? This is something called the reasoning of being neither singular nor multiple. So you might want to say, oh, it's multiple. But then I would say, multiple of what? So a multiplicity has to be a multiplicity of singular things. So I have to find where is that singular thing. So you say, okay, well, the legs are the multiple things, the sides are the multiple things, the top. Then I try and find where's the truly existing, independently existing leg. And I break that down even further. I say, okay, well, there's a top to the leg, there's a bottom to the leg, there's a side to the leg, there's a front to the leg. Or going down even further, I can talk about all the atoms that make up the leg. And then I try and find a singular atom that even makes that up. Because without a singular, like I was saying before, you can't even talk about a multiplicity. Like you can't talk about a group of people without having individual people. So I break it down so much that I can't even find the constituent parts, a truly existing, independently existing constituent part of something called a table, let alone a table. So in the same way, when we talk about the selflessness of a person, you might say, okay, I am Justin. I was born 44 years ago, and I have lived up to now. And there's like this idea that there's this ongoing, permanent entity called Justin that has existed since then and still exists now. But when we examine what that is, there's a body, and there's a consciousness, and there's a lot of sub-processes within that consciousness, like feeling, perception, emotions, intentions, thoughts. And all of those things are changing moment to moment to moment to moment to moment. So there's no actually truly existing, permanently existing Justin that ever existed. There's just a constantly changing group of things. Even then, the idea of Justin itself, you might say, okay, well, I have my body. I can think about my ears, my eyes, my face, my hands, my internal organs. And then when I go through my consciousness, like my feelings, my emotions, my identities, my name, my thoughts, all of those things as well, I keep finding my things that are supposedly mine, but I never find the me who is supposedly controlling or possessing those things. So these are the types of analytic processes that one would go through to determine or to bring oneself to an experience, or initially maybe just an intellectual understanding of emptiness, that is the ultimate reality. So still conventionally, I can understand that there's no truly independently existing Justin, while at the same time I can say, I can still refer to myself. I can say, I'm Justin, please bring me a glass of water. So that understanding of, or even experience or realization of the lack of a truly independently existing Justin doesn't wash my brain of ordinary language and an ability to talk to people in a normal way. So when we're talking about these two truths, from one perspective, we talk about them as two things, because you kind of have to talk about them in that way. And also the level of consciousness that engages with each is different. So kind of an ordinary, dualistic, unenlightened state of mind is the kind of consciousness or the level of consciousness which is experiencing and engaging with conventional reality. It itself is also conventional reality, that ordinary, unenlightened mind, dualistic mind. And then ordinary mind cannot see the ultimate truth. So this gets into some other side topics of Buddhist philosophy and practice, but essentially they say that ordinary mind is dualistic and it's conventional. And because it is dualistic, it cannot see a non-dual reality, which is what ultimate truth is. And I'll talk a little bit more later when I talk about kind of the stages by which one would experience ultimate truth, what non-dual means. That might just be like a vague term to you or something you've heard in Buddhist jargon, but maybe have never really connected what that really means. So, once again, conventional truth, or I prefer the more literal rendering of that term, which is fictitious truth or obscured truth. The reason why it's called fictitious or obscured is because it is a reflection of our own habituation and conditioning. It's not an experience of authentic reality, as it is. It's always kind of obscured by a projection of our own dualistic mind, of our own karmic patterns. So like taking that back a step again, I showed how, maybe I didn't really show, but I demonstrated what the logic might be to find that this table doesn't independently exist. However, the mind that directly experiences that is only what we would call, let's not worry about what it's called, but it's a non-dual state of consciousness. And our ordinary state of consciousness, ordinary unenlightened dualistic state of consciousness is what sees this as something singular and independently existing. That's the way it's experienced by our ordinary mind. So therefore, that sense of it being permanent, singular, independently existing is actually a contrivance. It is a projection that is actually obscuring our experience of what's actually there, or what is the genuine ultimate reality. So that's why it's called conventional truth, or fictitious or obscured truth. So now, okay, I understand why it's obscured. Why is it truth? What does that mean? Doesn't that just sound oxymoronic to say fictitious truth or obscured truth? It's true because to the person who hasn't experienced ultimate reality, it feels true, it looks true, and it even functions in a way that is quote-unquote true. For example, if I plant a rose seed, a rose flower is going to grow, and a corn plant's not going to grow. So that is conventionally true. That is, according to the conventional truth, that is something that we can kind of rely upon to a certain extent. So that's why it's called conventional truth. And also because we grasp at it as being true. We think that that's true, ultimately, but it's not. So when someone is experiencing things in that way, then everything that they're doing, because they're still believing that everything's true in the sense of independently existing and so forth, and they themselves as a subject, they also see that or experience that as something that truly exists in a permanent, singular, and independently existing way. Everything that they're doing is placing more habits, more conditioning on their consciousness to keep doing that, to keep experiencing things in that way. And so that's what's meant by creating karma, and that's what's meant by the suffering of all pervasive conditioned existence when you talk about the three kinds of suffering, that as long as you're still fixating on a truly existing self, truly existing object, truly existing action, that kind of thing. Often if you get into teachings on ultimate reality, they'll use this jargon term called the three spheres. Say that if an action is done, for example, in the context of the six perfections, we can talk about an act of ordinary generosity versus the perfection of generosity. So an ordinary act of generosity is one in which I still believe that there is a truly existing me as the agent or the giver, a truly existing object, or you could sometimes say the action of giving, and a truly existing being who would receive that gift, or who is even maybe in need of that gift, something like that. And as long as those kind of fixations are still there, then that's still virtuous in the sense that it's creating more positive habits and maybe reducing the force of our negative habits like greediness, miserliness, selfishness, fixation, grasping, like at our own interest. But it's still karmic. It's still creating karma and ultimately still obscuring us from experiencing reality in its unconditioned or unauthentic state. So let me try and connect that a little bit more. When we talk about this so-called authentic state or unconditioned state, or what it might be to exist without conditioning, then we're talking about Buddha nature. So in Mahayana Buddhism, one of the most common topics and really emphasized in our tradition is that all beings have Buddha nature, and that your true nature, like the nature of your mind, of all beings, is actually equal to that of a Buddha. And that the process of so-called gaining enlightenment or so-called making spiritual progress isn't one of gaining something new or getting smarter, but it's actually one of removing obscurations and removing the things that are obscuring you from just being what you already were in the first place, in your most natural state, in your most fundamental state of being. You're already a fully enlightened Buddha. And so the practice of the path, I guess you would say, is not one of learning new things necessarily. That's can be part of it, but it's generally talked about as one of removing obscuration and revealing what was already there. So a common example of that is the sun and the clouds. So the sun is always there, shining just as bright whether there's a cloud there or not, right? So like you're taking that as the example, your Buddha nature is fully resplendent, actual Buddha, fully enlightened Buddha, all the qualities, all the wisdom, all the love, all the power of a Buddha. But because of not recognizing that and then falling into this fixation of a truly existing self, truly existing objects of my experience, all of those things, I start making this pattern of conditioning, of habituating. And instead of living in the spontaneous, present, natural flow of enlightened mind, I'm now actually obscuring that with conditioning and habituation through this process of karmic formation. So then, in this path of this so-called experience of or practice of the ultimate truth, what you're doing is trying to see through to the source of that fixation, remove it to get back to an experience of what was already there, this so-called natural state of Buddha nature. So one term that's often used is that the result of Buddhahood is not an actual cause and effect result. My action didn't create Buddhahood, because Buddhahood was already there. So my action of practice actually was just something that separated the obscurations from the Buddhahood that was already there. So you don't need to create enlightenment for yourself, according to Mahayana Buddhism. You just need to discover it's already there, and then work at cleaning it off. So Dzongsa Khyentse Rinpoche uses an example really regularly that I really like about this, which is washing dishes. So he says that the act of washing dishes is almost like you could think of it in the same way that we think of the practice of the path and kind of recognizing your own Buddha nature. So he says you would never start actually washing the dishes if you didn't believe that there wasn't a truly pure dish under that dirt, under the food. And so by knowing that there's a pure dish there, you'll go through the effort of washing it. And so one of the really important things when you get more serious about the path, and there's more teachings about this in terms of the ultimate truth and Buddha nature, is to gain a conviction in your own Buddha nature, to really believe that. In a lot of the teachings, like the Ornament of Precious Liberation of Gampopa, the very first topic in the book is Buddha nature. The very first topic is, you have Buddha nature. Now what are you going to do about it? So then he talks about how to rely upon a spiritual teacher, the preciousness of human birth, suffering of samsara, the six perfections, bodhicitta, refuge, all that kind of stuff. So it's considered by many teachers in the Tibetan tradition, in the Buddhist traditions in general, a really crucial feature to gain some kind of trust, some kind of experience, some kind of belief in this fundamental pure Buddha nature. A little bit of a side topic, but when we're talking about conventional and ultimate truth, in some levels, when we talk about ultimate truth, we're just talking about emptiness, and in some levels, we're talking about the luminous nature of mind, more in this Buddha nature direction. So let's come back around to the general topic, though. So one thing that I wanted to talk about tonight a little bit is the union of the two truths, which is a little bit of a tricky topic, but it's important to talk about. What happens a lot of times is that people, you hear that conventional truth is obscured. It's not really true. So you think, let's get rid of it, or let's ignore it, or let's dismiss it, and let's just go for emptiness. So what happens is, for a lot of people, is that they fall so deep into this idea of emptiness that they start ignoring their conduct. They start ignoring or even dismissing other people's feelings. They start dismissing or ignoring their own feelings, and not living in a situation where, for example, we can say things aren't real as much as we want. As long as you're still experiencing them as real, they're real for you. And I don't know if that is making sense to you, but as long as your mind's habituation is still in a situation of thinking that your self is real, then your self will have needs, and if you don't provide for those needs, in terms of setting boundaries, giving yourself space, then you're going to create this really big tension in yourself of denying your own needs while still feeling those needs. Does that make sense? So you can deny them through some philosophical idea. Oh yeah, everything's empty, so it doesn't matter. But your experience hasn't caught up with the thought. And then there is this split within a person that is, I intellectually know it's empty, but I'm still experiencing it as real. So, one thing that is important is to not jump to trying to just apply this emptiness at everything, but try to gain experience of it where the experience starts to actually shine through in an authentic manner, where it's actually helping you to experience things in that way, not just think about them as that way. What I mean by that is that, let's say you're meditating on emptiness. You're meditating on this ultimate reality. What happens is not that all at once, the second you gain a little bit of experience of emptiness, you now see everything as blank, and all of these tables and things just disappear from your vision. That's not what happens at all. It's that your fixation on seeing them as somehow solid and real, independently existing, slowly starts to, if this is my grip of belief, slowly starts to loosen up more and more and more. Like the belief in the truly existing self, objects of my experience, emotions, whatever, slowly eases up. And in accordance with that, you might feel a bit more and more freedom, a bit more and more spaciousness in your experience. So it's not one of seeing emptiness and erasing everything that I've ever thought and known in the world. And it's also not one of seeing emptiness and then erasing my personality and becoming a vegetable. So like I can just say I've met like a lot of enlightened beings, like really highly accomplished enlightened beings. They're funny, they're joyful, they're loving. Sorry, I get a little teared up when I think about it. Okay. Anyway, so what is happening then is that as you're seeing ultimate truth more, the experience of conventional appearances is still there, but you're chipping away at what we call conventional, the truth aspect of conventional truth. So there's still the appearance of a table, of a glass, of whatever, but you're chipping away at the belief that, it's not even a belief on a conscious level, it's like a subconscious fixation, that things are somehow real in an independent way, that things exist in and of themselves. So there's still, we can distinguish something called mere conventional appearances versus conventional truth. Conventional truth is that things appear, but you have a fixation that they somehow truly and independently exist. Mere conventional appearance would be something that someone who has a deep experience or realization of emptiness has, while still being able to see and interact with the world. Like, they didn't become blind to tables just because they realize that tables don't inherently exist like that. So, you might ask then, well, what is their experience like? And that's where we start talking about the union of the two truths. So, if you read, or if you have ever read the Heart Sutra, then it says, form is emptiness, emptiness is form is not emptiness, emptiness is not other than form. So let's just take a real simple example like this glass or this table. On one level, when we're talking about emptiness, we're not talking about some thing over there in some vacuum in space. We're talking about the nature of conventional things themselves. So if I want to talk about emptiness, I have to talk about the emptiness of something. I can talk about emptiness as a general principle, but like in general, when I want to talk about the emptiness of this glass, what I'm talking about is the fact that this glass doesn't exist in and of itself. That itself is the emptiness of this glass. So, some people might want to say then that, okay, emptiness is the important part. This is just fake. Like the conventional thing is fake. Emptiness is real. So I only want emptiness. Then what the problem with that is that emptiness also isn't real in the sense of some independently existing entity. And that's why we have to come around full circle. As a practitioner, or even philosophically, you first have an appearance of something that seems super real, solid. To overcome that grasping, you have to go to its lack of reality. But even that lack of reality is still just an idea. Based upon an entity, you can talk about non-entity. So those are interdependent things. The non-entity doesn't exist without the entity. So you also have to go beyond that concept. So in terms of the experience of the union of the two truths, they would say that a person is simultaneously seeing the conventional appearance without any fixation upon it being truly existing. So it is going back to that expression of form is emptiness, emptiness is form, but we'll say sometimes when talking about the union of the two truths, or the union of appearance and emptiness, the term that they'll use is even as it's appearing, it's seen as empty. Even as you see its emptiness, it's still appearing. So the vision of emptiness doesn't erase the conventional or appearance of a thing. another topic that I'm not sure I should open that can of worms, but you might say then, are they the same? Are the two truths the same, or are they different? That's a whole nother topic that gets into some problematic situations if you tried to say they're the same or different. So one of the ideas about the experience of emptiness is that it is beyond your conceptual mind. That the experience of emptiness isn't one of fixating on an idea of emptiness, but it's one that goes beyond your mind's ability to say it's this or that. So that's what I was saying before also about if you were experiencing reality, it wouldn't just be a fixation on emptiness, because emptiness itself is still just an imputed idea based upon fullness, something like that, of like, in terms of conventional truth, the fullness being something like the innate belief that this independently exists. So, more on this union of the two truths. Things like rainbows or a reflection in a mirror or the reflection of the moon in water are great examples because they're easier to see that they're not real. Because like we can see a rainbow and then like go and try and grab it and easily recognize that it's not real. The problem with other things is that I think this glass is real, but when I go grab it, it's still there. I can still hold it and I can still drink out of it, so it tricks us a little bit deeper. So those examples are great for starting to see the way that works and the way that our mind's grasping works, that you could be tricked into thinking that rainbow is some real entity or something. But the deception is even deeper with things like that are more solidly existing. But exactly, I mean, it's because things interdependently exist, like for example, the coming together of the rain or the sprinkler and the sunlight, that this interdependent display of a rainbow comes up. And in the same way, everything that we see, everything that we experience, even our sense of self, is coming together as a mere interdependent coming together of causes and conditions. And if we could just see that all the time in every moment about everything that we see, we would be enlightened. But unfortunately, that's not how we experience things, and therefore we get involved in all kinds of hopes and fears, expectations, and so forth that leave us in this state that we might call dissatisfaction, like samsaric state of dissatisfaction, and that's perpetuated by continuing to reinforce those habitual patterns every time we see and experience things as permanent, singular, independently existing.
Thank you.
For more about this, there's a really great video. This was recommended last month too. If you didn't watch it, maybe you could watch it again, or you could watch it this time. And if you already watched it, I would say watch it 3 more times. A teaching that Ken Rinpoche gave on the AWAM Garden of a Thousand Buddhas YouTube channel it's just titled Emptiness, but it's all about the Heart Sutra, and specifically about something that's called the 4 applications of emptiness, which is form is emptiness, emptiness is form, form is not other than emptiness, emptiness is not other than form. That's a formula that's called the 4 applications of emptiness. And that video is really helpful at getting into a lot more detail than I can get into right now in an hour or so on this idea of the union of the two truths, and that kind of without a supposed entity, you can't talk about the non-entity or emptiness of that thing, that kind of thing, and the interdependence, and you could say union or unity of a thing and its emptiness, or you could say appearance and emptiness. One reason that we talk about appearance so much in Buddhism is that we're not as concerned about what's actually out there as the way that you're perceiving it. So there's this word appearance gets used a lot, because I can talk about this glass as like a physical entity, but what I actually see is like a projection of this in my mind. Like my senses, the glass itself, light in the atmosphere, whatever light is in the room, together with my consciousness' ability to know and reflect an image, all of those things interdependently come together, make an image of something in my mind. So I'm not directly accessing what is actually out there. When we talk scientifically about what kind of spectrums of light our eyes can see, and then therefore how that appears in our eyes versus other animals who see things in different ways, it's clear that everything that we see, at least visually, is actually a mental projection. It's like there is some input from the outside coming together with our consciousness and our sense organs, creating a mental image of things. And then our mind projects so much onto that mental image. It's not just a bare image of what's actually there. Like this habitual patterning from the past of fixating on things as if they're real, as if they're truly independently existing. Not only that, but all the cultural conditioning, all of our family values, all of those things are creating a situation where we see things in our own individualistic way. We can talk about collectively, we all agree this is a table and this is a glass or whatever, but we're all experiencing them according to our own karmic conditioning, according to our own conditioning and fixation and all that. It's the same in that we all see them as permanent, independently existing, singular, and so forth. But anyway, we all are seeing them with our own shades of conditioning. So that's what in Buddhism is often called something called karmic appearances or appearances of your mental imprints. We would say that you don't ever see anything as it really is. You're only seeing an appearance of your conditioning, an appearance of mental imprints that you've placed from the past that will lead you to see things in a particular way. So the whole process of Buddhist practice, and especially in terms of the current context, is to go from that conditioned way of experiencing things to a direct experience of those things that is not kind of filtered through your conditioning. It's not filtered through your habitual patterns, through your karma. And that would be an experience of the union of the two truths. Like if you were perfectly experiencing the union of the two truths, then you're not seeing through your conditioning. I'm going to talk a little bit about, oh man, this is a can of worms, but we're going to go there. We're going there, busting out notes from years ago on a notebook from India. All right, the faults if you tried to say the two truths are identical. If you tried to say conventional ultimate are the same or different, there's 4 faults to each. This is from the sutras. So, what happens if I tried to say that the two truths are identical? Then, if they were identical, then as an ordinary person, when I'm seeing the conventional appearance of this cup, I should also be seeing its emptiness. So they're not identical. You couldn't say that. If they were identical, when you see one, you have to see the other. That's one problem. The second is that in the same way that I told you that every time you see the conventional as true, conventional truth, then you are perpetuating conditioning. You're perpetuating your karmic conditioning that keeps you locked in samsara. Then by seeing the conventional and that conventional perpetuating your experience of samsara, seeing the ultimate should also perpetuate your experience in samsara. Does that make sense? If they were the same, if they were identical. The third is in the experience of ultimate truth, ultimate reality, there's no differentiation of anything. Maybe this is a little bit abstract, but I told you before that an experience of the ultimate is going beyond all conceptual thought of this versus that. So maybe I can explain this a little bit more clearly. Someone's meditating on the emptiness of anything or all phenomena, maybe. First they go through and find the reasoning why things are empty. That leads them to an experience of unfindability, you might say. So like I'm looking for this table, for example, and I don't find it. That leaves me in a space where my mind is just experiencing an ineffable state of emptiness, you might say. And in that there is no table versus no table, or up versus down, yes versus no, existence versus non-existence. Those are all just concepts which are further obscuring the genuine experience of reality. So in that state of ultimate reality, there's no differentiation between this is Mark, that's Bryce, this is Eliza, whatever. There's no differentiation. So if the two truths were identical, also there could be no differentiation in the conventional reality. There could be no distinction between this versus that. This is deep abstract philosophy. Maybe this isn't connecting like in an experiential way, but I find this super interesting and helpful. And the reason why is that this is just another way that people might try to add another layer of fixation. And by saying that the true truths are neither singular, neither identical, nor different, throws you even more into a state of ineffability, for me. It's another like prevention of you trying to hold on to it and saying it's this or that. So the last one is of the identical, the faults of it being identical. Yeah. To experience conventional truth, you don't need to do anything special, you just see it. You don't need to seek it out, right? To see ultimate truth, we have to go through some process, some analysis, some instructions from our teacher, some pith instructions, like in a meditative context, maybe a pith instruction of like recognizing the nature of your mind, or in an analytic process, like some kind of way of breaking down things, like I said, like looking for the self by looking through your body and your mind and your emotions and your identities and all those kind of things. You have to actually seek that out. So the last fault would be that in the same way that when you see the conventional, you don't need to do anything special to see it, you wouldn't need to do anything special or seek out anything special to see the ultimate truth. It would just be obvious to you, and it's not. So those are 4 reasons why conventional and ultimate are not identical. You might say, okay, they're not identical, so that means they're different, right? All right, so if they were different in the sense of being completely separate entities, then there's another 4 faults. All right. That would be, for example, that, okay, if they were completely different, then seeing the ultimate reality wouldn't free you from the suffering that's experienced conventionally. Like, I experience suffering because of conventional truth, because of believing in conventional truth. Because I believe I am conventionally true, then I can suffer. And so, if they were completely separate things, then seeing the lack of true existence of myself wouldn't lead me to experience nirvana. It wouldn't lead me to peace. Maybe this one's a little more abstract, but I'm just going to go for it anyway. So, if in the general explanations, I would say that the ultimate truth is the ultimate truth of relative things, right? So, like, the ultimate truth of this glass is that it doesn't inherently exist. So the actual nature of this thing is, ultimate truth is the actual nature of this thing. Emptiness, you could say, is the ultimate nature of this thing. So if they were completely separate, like completely separate entities, emptiness couldn't be the nature of this glass, in the same way that this glass isn't the nature of this computer, because they're 2 completely different things. So, you know, you can conceptually distinguish relative and ultimate, but they're not completely separate, is the point. Okay. The other one would be that this is very similar to the last one, but the fact that conventional things don't exist in and of themselves wouldn't be the ultimate truth, even though it is, because they're completely unrelated entities, in the same way that the fact that this glass doesn't truly exist isn't the ultimate nature of my computer, because they're completely different entities. That one's kind of abstract, I think. Maybe it makes sense to like deep Tibetan philosophers. I understand the point, but it's a little bit more abstract. And then the last of the 4 faults of what it would be if you were to say that the 2 truths were completely distinct entities is that, okay, yep. All right. Let's say you realize the ultimate truth, and through realizing the ultimate truth, you attain nirvana. But because that ultimate truth is completely disconnected from, completely separate from conventional truth, you would fall back into obscuration. And maybe for some of you that are less deep in Buddhist philosophy, that's like, okay, why not? But the idea in the Buddhist path is that as you are seeing reality clearer and clearer, the causes for you to fall back into samsaric existence, or the causes for you to experience delusion, are completely eliminated to the point where you would never fall back. But if those 2 truths were completely separate things, even though you attained the ultimate reality, or attained realization of the ultimate reality, you could just fall back into experiencing things conventionally because they're completely separate. So the point is that we can conceptually distinguish conventional and ultimate by saying that conventional is this obscured reality. It is seen through the lens of this innate fixation of singular, permanent, independently existing, and ultimate is the absence of that. But if we try to go so far as to say that those two truths are identical or completely the same, it leads to all kinds of problematic scenarios. So basically the idea is that we can conceptually distinguish them, but we can't say that they are absolutely separate. We can conceptually say that they're kind of two sides of the same coin, but we can't really say they're the same thing like that. Does that make sense? I feel a little bit of regret for even bringing that topic into this discussion. I hope that wasn't just like a roller coaster ride of abstract philosophy. Part of my goal with these monthly teachings is just to plant some seeds for further study, because there's only so much we can talk about in an hour and a half and discuss. And a way to get people together and start thinking about these things, maybe read some more things. I try to recommend more teachings, other things that you could go to, other videos you could watch, other books you could read. Because, this, for example, the topic of the true truths is a very huge topic. It's a topic that is a primary aspect of people's studies in the Buddhist academies, Buddhist studies centers, that they'll study for a number of years. And it's something that I have been, not as a primary topic of study, I'm constantly reading books about this, but I've been reading about for many, 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 many years. So I hope that if any of you are more new to this, you don't feel disappointed that you're not getting every sub point and all this kind of stuff, but maybe that it's planting an imprint, making an impression, making you question a little bit about reality, providing a framework to think within about these kind of ideas of how we experience things versus maybe what's actually there in a more genuine way, and how we could maybe align ourselves more with that reality, and what kind of experience that might be, or what kind of freedom that could bring, all those kind of topics. So it's fodder for a review audially. I'll listen again. I know that I've gotten feedback a couple times that it was a lot, that some of these sessions are a lot of information in a short time. And sometimes I think that I should spread out a topic over a few months or something like that, but then there's the problem of getting the people to actually come to each and every one of those to follow through. So I'm kind of at a little bit of an impasse about how I choose topics for these teachings. And if any of you have suggestions for more topics you want to hear about, you should send an email to us too, and we're open to those kind of suggestions too.